for you.
What do you want?
But, okay, so, and they can hear me if I don't talk in the microphone.
Yeah. Tell them to put them on mute.
But we have to put them on mute.
I
We have to
did.
do that star 74.
Oh, that's right. I failed my job. Oh my gosh.
You're fired.
Star 78.
Doug was here, he'd know how to do it.
I know. Doug is hearing and he's rolling his eyes.
Okay, everybody on the phone, we're gonna get started in like 2 minutes once Teresa figures out what she's doing. Yeah.
Doug did warn us that we needed him.
All participants are now in listen-only mode.
Okay. Okay. Sarkis is listening. I'm gonna tell Sarkis that if he can't hear me to let us know. Yvonne, are we ready?
It's your show.
Okay.
No.
No. Wait, are we muted?
Oh.
I'm sharp.
Okay, we're almost ready, everybody.
There are people on
Yvonne, give these back to John.
Okay.
With all the OCTA.
Okay, Doug, Marty, we're good.
Okay, so I think everyone on the phone is off mute.
Yes.
Why do I need the microphone?
because there's people in the North State that are using. Yeah, we can hear you.
Us old guys can't hear.
Okay, I can talk louder. Is this on now? Okay. Okay. So thank you everybody for coming. This is the second ATP 2019 ATP workshop, and it's also known as Cycle 4. And so I want to thank Yvonne and BCAG for hosting us here. I love to come to Chico, so I'm always happy to do a workshop here. And so we have a couple options to participate. We have people here in person, and then you can listen on the phone, and if you have questions, you can send them to, what is the, ctc@dot.ca.gov. So if you're on the phone, you have a question, send it in through the email, and then Teresa will get the question, and then we'll address it in the meeting here. Let me see. So today we're gonna mostly focus on the guidelines. Some of it will be a repeat of the first workshop, but then we'll also talk about things that seem to be of more interest in the first workshop, and talk about if there was any kinds of interesting issues that came up in the first workshop. The next workshop is next week in LA on the Thursday, is that the 9th? At Metro from 10 to 1, right, Teresa?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. I think before we start, I do want to do introductions in the room, just because then I try to remember names, as many as I can. So if you don't mind, can we do that? I'm Lori Waters. I'm the program manager for the ATP at the California Transportation Commission. And we'll start here with Carl.
Carl Anderson, MTC. Is it on?
Carl Anderson, MTC.
Dan Landon, Nevada County Transportation Commission.
Woodrow Deloria, El Dorado County Transportation Commission.
Brett Setterfield, Shasta Regional Transportation Agency.
Louis Zhao, OCTA.
Tracy Betancourt, City of Chico.
Brendan Ottoboni, City of Chico.
Janine Rude, Chico Velo.
Brian Davies, Sierra County Transportation Commission.
Dave Riverdale, San Joaquin Council of Governments.
Cindy Lynch, City of Wairika.
Bryce Goldstein.
Jeff Schwein, Green Dot.
Dan Wayne, Shasta.
Jim Graham, Plumas County Public Works.
Tammy Quigley, Caltrans.
Mark Maddox, Town of Paradise.
Brandon Jonas, California Conservation Corps.
Eric Friedrich, Association of Monterey Bay Area Governments.
Debbie Trujillo with the Stanislaus Council of Governments.
Teresa Favila, CTC.
Rachel Phillips, Butte County Public Health.
Jody Putnam, Butte County Public Health.
Teresa McWilliam, ATP Program Coordinator, Manager.
Ted Davini, ATP Program Manager, Caltrans.
Emily Abrahams, ATP Caltrans.
Mike Massaro, Contract Engineer, City of Oroville.
Jeremy Nonegel, Dock and Engineering.
Marty Thomas, Glenn County Transportation Commission.
Rick Tippett, Trinity County Transportation Commission.
Jessica Gomez, Tehama County Transportation.
Meave Landon, Tehama County Transportation.
Marcella Clem, Humboldt County Association of Governments.
Lane Green, City of Chico.
Tracy Frost, Caltrans Planning.
Ivan Garcia, BCAG.
Anybody
else?
I can't stay long. Janet Orth, Mendocino Council of Governments.
And you, strange man?
John Clark with BK.
Okay, so I do want to mention a couple people that are here, just so you know, because they'll be providing expertise probably throughout. There's Teresa, who works for the commission. She is my partner in crime in this workshop. And then Teresa McWilliams and Ted Davini are the program managers at Caltrans for the ATP. Teresa handles the south and Ted the north. I got that right. And then Emily Abrahams is also with Caltrans, and she is responsible for the non-infrastructure and the Active Transportation Resource Center, correct? Anyone else? Okay. So those of you that have come to these workshops before, you know that I like to start out a workshop with an inspiring ATP story. But I've been really busy, and I didn't have a lot of time to come up with the story. And I promised everyone that I wouldn't show any more pictures of my family, and I haven't gone on any weird vacations. So I wasn't sure what to talk about. And then last night, Teresa and I were talking to Yvonne and Tracy with the City of Chico, and I realized that the inspirational story is right here in Butte County, because Butte County has done very, very well in the ATP, particularly for a smaller area. And so last night, I asked my super intern to send me some stats on how Butte County has done in the ATP. And okay, so in cycle one, Butte County, and this is all the cities and other entities within Butte County, submitted 12 applications. There was 1 funded in the state and 2 funded in the small, urban, and rural. Let's see, and there was 1 in Paradise, 1 in Biggs, and 2 in Paradise and 1 in Biggs. And then in the second cycle, there was 11 applications submitted from Butte County. 3 were funded in the statewide, 4 funded in the small, urban, and rural, so only 4 not funded. So they got over half of what they submitted funded. And there was 1, 2, 4 in Paradise, 1 from Butte County Public Works, 1 from Biggs, and 1 from Chico. And in the third cycle, they submitted 8. 2 funded, 1 in Chico and 1 in Oroville. And in the recent augmentation, there was another one in Butte County. So that is pretty good. And so I was kind of wondering why they do so well here. And so we were talking last night, and Tracy had some really good thoughts, and she was telling us about how that it's not just, you know, her turning in good applications, it's that their business community and the residents and everybody is very supportive of active transportation. And they were saying that if they ask someone for a letter of support, they get it right away. So I really like this example of being able to do active transportation well. And in the North State Super Region, we were talking about Paradise and how the town of Paradise has a really great comprehensive look at active transportation in their town, and is just kind of slowly working their way through their projects. And I think that comes through in their applications. So I was going to ask Tracy, did you have anything else that, any other tips that you might? And also, I'm going to ask you to do this again to tell everyone what is the #1 thing that you have to remember when you fill out an application.
You need to follow the instructions. And that's my tip also. So thank you.
Drop the mic.
And what about Mark? Where'd Mark go? Mark, do you have anything you can,
Here we go again.
anything inspirational?
I go back to, Teresa was saying this about telling a story with your application and really communicating that through photographs and demonstrating the need. Having pictures of your project area without kids or without people attempting to navigate the existing conditions doesn't really speak to the people grading the applications. And so what we try and do is try and capture and tell that story through the photographs and the narrative sections, and use the guidelines to shape how we answer our questions in a detailed fashion. So,
Yvonne, do you want to say anything?
That sums it up.
Okay.
Just really think about what you're applying for. Have peer review. What we do for BCAG is we may size up future ATP projects with CMAQ funds and go through that environmental or preliminary engineering and try to knock them out of the park with ATP.
Thank you. Mark and Yvonne have really tried to keep it a secret, particularly how well Town of Paradise has done, but unfortunately everybody asks me, can you give me an example of somebody who's done really well? And I always mention Paradise, so sorry about that, Mark.
Chico has done well too.
Yeah, and Chico. Okay, so are there any questions or comments before we get started? Okay. Let's see if I can figure out how to work this. Okay, so this is the workshop schedule, and it's changed a little bit since the last workshop that we had. So the next workshop is in Los Angeles next week, and then we'll be in Oakland on November 16th. And one thing that's important about that November 16th workshop is that after the ATP workshop, we're going to be doing an SB1 accountability guidelines workshop. So it's going to be a full day, and those guidelines will be very important too. And they'll influence the which programs, Teresa?
For sure, the local partnership program, the trade corridors, and the solutions for congested corridors.
Yes, and because the ATP gets SB1 funds, it may influence that too. We're not sure yet, so we're working that out. So if you can stay for that too, that would be great.
Sorry, and shop as well.
Okay. And then we'll be in Fresno, and then on December 7th, we will be in San Bernardino. Before it was at Riverside, but it looks like we'll be in San Bernardino, and then Monterey, and back to Sacramento. And you'll see that we're going to try to wrap up the guidelines earlier than we have in the past, so then we can focus more on the applications, because we haven't had a lot of time for those in other workshops, and that seems to be where we need a lot of input. Okay. any questions on the workshops and the process? Okay, I went through this at the last workshop, but I'll do it again because there's some people here that weren't at the last one. This is what commission staff is going to commit to consider all comments, post workshop materials prior to workshop. Oh, speaking of that, the workshop materials are posted on the website for those of you on the phone. I didn't get it done real early, but I did get it done before the workshop, so I was happy about that. We'll try to keep moving the process forward and not get stuck somewhere, and then try to keep a statewide perspective, listen to everyone, and care about the program a lot. And this is, the working group is all of you. So I would ask that you be respectful of other viewpoints, consider the greater good of the program and not just the one particular project that you're trying to get funded. Propose ideas in a public setting when possible. And what I mean by that is sometimes we'll have a workshop, and this is on any of our programs, and we think everything went great. We had this great discussion. Everybody agreed with everything. And then we go back to the office, and then we start getting phone calls of everybody that's not happy about what happened in the workshop. And then it's difficult then because then we're not talking about things in a public setting. And I know that particularly for those of you that work for agencies, there are times that for sensitivity reasons you can't bring up things in a public setting. But to the extent you can, please do. It really does help us get a good sense of what everybody's thinking and where the consensus is moving towards. And to trust commission staff, because we really do care. We work really hard, particularly right now, and we care about our programs and we care about transportation, and we're trying to do the best we can. So please trust us that that's what we're doing. Okay, so this is what we're going to do today. Review the workshop strategy. We already did that. So I have some copies of the discussion draft if any of you need one. I haven't changed it since the last workshop because the first workshop was just kind of a kickoff and overview. So I didn't think I was ready to change anything yet. So everything's the same, but I know that some things came up that definitely will change, like things in the schedule. So, but right now it's the same as what was posted before. And then I want to hear from all of you. And since we are in the North State and more of a rural area, I anticipate that that might be the focus of the meeting. So I kind of want to hear from all of you to see the direction of the discussion and see if there are certain areas that we should focus on more than others. And, oh, I wanted to do this in the last workshop, but we didn't quite get there, but finalize the schedule, because that's the one thing that everybody really cares about. Okay, that's the... Okay, so this PowerPoint, this is the same that I did in the first workshop, but the lighter blue are things that came out in the last workshop that I wanted to call to your attention here because they might change the discussion a little bit today. Okay, so if everybody can go to your guidelines. Well, let me see if there's any questions before we start. Anything? Okay. Okay, so if you go to page 2, does anybody need a draft? Okay. Yeah, I have a couple. Okay, it's also posted on the CTC website. Okay, we're going to start with the schedule on page 2. Okay, so the schedule it flows kind of similar to the last cycle. I tried to adjust it a little bit. I was actually trying to get us a little bit more evaluation time, but at the last workshop, we had some suggestions that for the large MPOs to submit their optional guidelines on April 19th, and that seemed fine, so I will change that. And then to project applications to Caltrans June 15th as opposed to May 30th. I'm not sure on that because it's 2 weeks difference in what, and it gives more time for the applicants, but then we have less time for the evaluation. So I'm gonna have to think about that. I don't know if what people, any comments on that in here? Carl? Yeah.
Do I need a microphone?
Oh, yeah.
Have we gotten a sense about how many more applications are going to be submitted since there's a lot more funds available? Is that going to be strenuous on the evaluator side, or what do you anticipate that looking like?
I think we'll have more. What do you guys think, Teresa and Ted? You think so too? Yeah. I think we're going to have more. And the one reason that I was thinking that maybe we wouldn't need quite as much time for the applicants, and we'll talk more about this later, is we are going to have 5 different applications, and particularly for the smaller projects, the application will be streamlined and it shouldn't be as onerous on the applicants. So I may do what Marcella suggested and just split it down the middle. And then Deborah, did you had some comments on the schedule at the?
Yes, Lori. The question is on the when the MPO has to turn in the deadline to turn in the recommended projects to CTC. Is there a way to extend that deadline? Because the dates for us, it's not that much time to get an evaluation team to look at the applications, and then also have the policy board would meet after the January due date. So could it be extended to February?
February when? What do you think?
The earliest part's fine.
Okay.
Because we meet on the 3rd Wednesday, so as long as we have time to get it to our policy board in January.
Okay, what do you think, David and Carl?
You've been comfortable with having MPOs submit project lists to you before they've been actually. You've been comfortable with having MPOs submit project lists to you before they've actually been adopted. So I see a lot of room for flexibility there.
Okay. Yeah, so maybe I'll do that. Maybe I could actually add something where you guys submit a draft list to me so then I can get started, and then the final we can change till sometime in early February. Okay. How does that work?
We're comfortable with that.
Okay, David.
The existing schedule works fine for us.
Okay. 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 Anything else on the schedule? Okay, so then I think I will take these suggestions and I'm going to change that in the guidelines, so then we'll schedule, we won't talk about it anymore. Does that sound good? Okay. Yay. Oh, yes. Please, when you speak, can you introduce yourself so the people on the phone know who's speaking? Okay, programming cycle on page 3. Some of this stuff I'm going to cover quickly because I covered it in the first cycle, but if we need to talk about it more, just stop me and we will. So for those of you that don't know, the ATP program is almost doubling its funding because of SB1. And one of the really great things about that is that we are able to make the program a 4-year program now. Before we just didn't have that much funding, so it was a 2-year program, but we have found that active transportation projects have a lot of the same issues as any other kind of transportation project, and so we've had some deliverability issues that we think will be solved to a certain extent by having a 4-year program. So that means that applicants can come in for a project and spread out their project over 4 years. And so so for this cycle 4, 2019, it will be, the programming years will be 1920, 2021, 21-22, and 22-23. And the way that we're thinking about continuing this is that for each cycle, each subsequent cycle, the first 2 years will be 100 million each year. And so the last 2 years of the current cycle and the first 2 years of the next cycle will overlap. So the outer 2 years will be 123 million each year. Does that sound like a good split on the years? Because we could change that, but it just seemed to make sense. Because, you know, theoretically, those first 2 years would be a lot of environmental and design. So maybe we wouldn't need as much, and the latter 2 years would be more construction. Does that sound good?
Yes.
Thanks, Yvonne. Did you have something, Teresa?
I have a question, but this is going back to the schedule. I think this is from Laura Cohen from Rails to Trail. I think pushing the due date into June is not a good idea because the review process requires time during summer when people are on vacation. And for applicants, I think there's enough lead time that people can adjust to a late May deadline.
Okay, so thank you, Laura. And I think that we had talked about maybe making it, I don't know, June 7th, or something like that. Okay. So we'll kind of give the applicants a little bit more time and the reviewers a little bit more time.
Okay.
And do you have another one?
There's another comment, a general comment. Can you please speak louder and repeat what was agreed to on a final schedule? All MPO recommendations need to be approved at MPO level by February? That's a question. Do all MPO recommendations need to be approved by February?
Okay, so what we talked about is I'm going to add a row in here. I'm going to have a deadline for when draft recommendations will come to the commission. So in case the MPO hasn't had a chance to go to their board, they can send in what they have so commission staff can get started on the programming. And then, but then I'll have a date of February, early February for the final submittal to be turned into the commission. Is that clear? Okay. Anything else, Teresa? Okay. Okay. So we talked about programming cycle and the distribution. I just want to point out that $4 million a year is allocated to the California Conservation Corps. That was in the budget, and it's anticipated for it to be that way for 5 years, but it will depend on, it has to be in the budget every year. So we're working on how we're going to do that. We're working with the CCC to come up with guidelines for them on how they will use their $4 million in funds. Half of the $4 million goes to the local Corps and half goes to the California Corps. Okay, I might have those guidelines for the next commission meeting. We'll see. Okay, and then so this is just the way I want to set up the guidelines. We have this whole thing about active transportation plan components. There's this big long list, and I want to move that into an appendix. And Emily is working on a way to make it a little bit, I don't know, how would you explain that?
This is Emily from Caltrans, but we're trying to make it follow more of a kind of planning process, because right now it's just kind of a list of elements and they don't necessarily go in any order. So we're kind of trying to make them just follow more of a planning process to be a little more streamlined.
Yeah, we're trying to make that section a little bit more effective and more useful to the applicants. Okay. Okay, so now it's going to get interesting here. So this is under funding restrictions. It was proposed to have a cap on applications from each entity, can only turn in so many. And so we talked about this some at the first workshop. We had a good discussion about it. And there's pros and cons. One of the a compelling argument for me, I'll have to say, came from Lewis, and is that if we start limiting applications, then we may not be showing the need for the funding. So that's a good reason to not limit the applications, because we want to keep showing that how much this program is needed. So anyway, so let's have a discussion about this now. What do people think? Woody?
Woodrow Delory, El Dorado County Transportation Commission. This is kind of our proposal. You know, this came from discussions that we had with other rural counties before the passage of SB 1. So we're hopeful that the additional $100 million will spread the ATP funds more equitably across all the state. But we were looking at ways to have more geographic equity in the program, and proposing a limit on applications was based on looking at the history of the program, the second cycle LA, and this is no attack on LA or any one individual agency, but they submitted 90 applications. The third cycle, they submitted 70 applications, and they received 23 of those. So we're really looking for a way to have better geographic equity, putting a cap on the number of applications any one jurisdiction could submit. May be a way to do that. I'm not exactly sure. It was proposed at the last meeting to base that cap on population. And as I've been thinking about that, if you base that on population, you're still going to have the same situation. LA is going to get the lion's share of those funds. So I'm not exactly sure how to apply it, but if we could collectively come up with a way to have better geographic equity, I'm pretty sure that the cap on applications is going to get voted off the island. So I'm not too concerned about that, but I've had quite a few phone calls this week talking about that. But you know, if anybody has any ideas on a better way to apply that, we'd certainly like to entertain that.
I'll just say that I'm so glad everyone's calling Woody directly and not me. That's great.
If it does move forward, I would think road miles would make more sense, because I don't think I have to explain that. And I agree not to have a cap on the number of applications submitted to show the importance of the program, but possibly the number of successful applications per area as a compromise.
You mean like a minimum? Or a maximum?
No. So another way to do that is we had talked about prioritizing. So if it appears that there's one agency that just seems to be getting an excessive amount, I don't know what that would be. They'd have to prioritize, and I don't know. You don't like that? No. Okay.
The Highway Safety Improvement Program has a cap on the total number of dollar amount on the total grants that you can receive as any one agency. And the reason they do that is the cap is intended to push the program out to the smaller groups as you get down towards the end. You're not doing a set aside for a particular region, but what you're doing is you're limiting the amount that any one agency can get, so that way overall the program can have more disbursement.
So before Patricia sends in an email on this, I will say that you know, I know LA does get a lot of awards, but she would say that they have a huge population too, and they really need it. So
we will be buying more mics.
So I think, you know, I did talk to Patricia this week, and really the issue that she's facing is that it's the same issue we're facing as a state, in that she wants to see geographic equity throughout LA and the county of LA, with you know, a large number of neighborhoods in the disadvantaged communities. And so, I know we've you know, we've beat that horse to death many times talking about DACs, but that really is the issue, in that a lot of the rural communities have a lot of impoverished people living in the communities at or below the poverty level. However, they're not in some kind of concentrated neighborhood. They're spread out throughout our foothill communities. And so if we can, you know, if that is a discussion we want to bring back and try to find out a better way to you know, provide for those communities, but also not disadvantage the rural communities, we'd really appreciate any ideas on that also.
So I'll just say right now that I did want to hear the discussion on a cap on applications, but I'll be honest, I don't think it's going to go forward, because I don't think there's enough support, and I don't know, even if I propose that to the commissioners, if they would support it either. So, oh, you would. Okay, yeah, maybe one would. So if we could, like Woody was saying, talk about something else that might have the effect that we're looking for, I'd like to hear those ideas too. Okay.
With or without, this is Shelley Kwan from Metro. With or without an application cap, ATP funding comes down to score. The different applications for different application sizes and more funding in cycle 4 should mean that projects can better fill out applications that fit their project type and size, and more projects can be funded. I think this was just a general comment. And then I have another from Benna Cheng, San Jose, from San Jose. Not sure if it's the city. Yeah, city of San Jose. Would it be possible to get some data to inform our conversation about caps? It's unclear to me if the data shows there is inequitable distribution of ATP grants. For example, the city of San Jose is the 3rd largest city in California, but we have only received 1 ATP grant.
Yeah, and I'm not, even if we did that, I'm not sure what it would show, because would it show the town of Paradise is getting, you know, more than they should, and we should limit what they're getting? You know, I don't know if we really want that either. So the way it should work is that the applications that are scoring the best are the ones that get funded. And the geographic balance is partly supposed to come out of the 3 components of the ATP, which is the statewide, the small urban and rural, and the MPO. That's where the intention was, to have some geographic balance. But I kind of would like to see what happens in this next cycle, because like what Shelley was saying is that with the more funding, will we be able to get to some of the areas that haven't been successful, like Trinity, and, you know, like El Dorado County got 2, was it 2 in the augmentation? One, okay. So to me, that might be an indication that we'll be able to get down a little bit further in the scoring to fund some of the areas that maybe are missing out just because they can't get 5 more DAC points or something. Yeah, you know, they do submit a lot, but I don't know if submitting a lot is, we had this discussion last time about if submitting a lot of applications is better, or submitting, you know, less really, really good ones. I don't know. So. Any other discussion on this? Okay, so I'm going to say right now that this is going to come out, Woody. Okay. Okay. But just so, there's a couple other things in here that we've had always in the guidelines, but I just moved them into this section, is that we don't supplant committed funds, and the ATP does not fund cost increases. And that's an interesting issue, because I'm hearing a lot about cost increases due to contractors having a lot of work, and so the bids are really high. And we've talked about this, I've talked about it with Ted some, and but I don't really even know how we could fund cost increases in the ATP and have it make sense and have it be fair. But so we'll just do the best we can, and if you do have an issue of major cost increase, we can work with you on scope change. Ted and Teresa are really good at helping to come up with solutions. They will come visit your project, give you some ideas on maybe there's something that you could do where you still achieve the same benefit, but within the cost that you have.
We can confirm that. It's been worked for us on rescoping.
Yeah.
And still delivering the intent of our original application.
Yes, thank you, Yvonne.
Okay, we have a comment from Mara Toomey from AMBAG. She says the real issue is geographic equity. This is going back to the prior topic. Is geographic equity, and that we need to focus on ways to make small rural agencies more competitive, and changes to the program that better assess the community needs and the value of the proposed projects. She thinks that additional funding will help address this issue.
Thank you, Mara. Okay, so
Lori.
Yes. Oh. Ted.
Lori, on scope changes, Ted Davini at Caltrans. I just wanted to say, one example in BCAG's area, when you have a scope change, if you have a cost overrun and you need to propose a scope change, we strongly encourage agencies to work closely with their MPO. If you are in an MPO area, you've got to have the MPOs or RTPA support and your Caltrans district staff. But most importantly, as you're considering your scope change, you have to look at maximizing the benefit to the active transportation modes. And that might be it might not be exactly what the local agency wants, but if an agency has a desire to do one side of the street, but maybe the app suggested the other side was more compelling, a more compelling need, there's a good chance that won't be supported by Caltrans or the CTC. I mean, it's come up where not all scope changes are going to be supportive. But there is some acknowledgement that there's not additional funds. So if you really have to dig deep, ideally, I think a lot of MPOs are very good at supporting cost increases with other funds, or maybe it's a committed transition plan to fully fund the project. But if that's not an option, you want to work closely with Caltrans staff and CTC staff to make sure it's clear that you're maximizing the need or the benefits to the need.
Yeah, and not all the scope changes have been supported, but most of them have. I think that we all have done a good job on that. And particularly, I think Ted and Teresa, they really came up with a good process for getting through those scope changes. Okay. So I wanted to go to page 7, and I wanted to talk about the federal aid eligible for the projects. So what's happened because of the SB1 funds, the state versus federal funding and the ATP has flipped. Before it was 2/3 federal, 1/3 state. Now it's 2/3 state, 1/3 federal. And so I wanted to talk about if we need to have something, the guidelines about what is definitely going to need to be federal aid eligible, or if we can put in there what doesn't need to be, so applicants can know they're just going to get state-only funding. Along with that is the fact that some of the funds are SB1 funds, and we had talked about that SB1 might have some accountability measures that aren't in the overall ATP. And we had talked in the last meeting about the Rebuilding California. Is that what that site is called? That has all the projects on it, the SB1 projects. So, so what's confusing to me is are we going to have to designate which projects are solely SB1 funded so we can report on those and so they can be on the website and it's easy to tell which ones are funded by SB1? And if we're going to do that, which ones would they be? Does anybody care, or would that just be something that we would do internally? So is that something that we need to talk about?
Anybody?
I think it would be helpful to know if it was state or federal funds. There's a lot of different timelines associated with NEPA and whatnot that could affect our ability to meet the milestones. So I think that's important to know.
So what we've done in the past is we try to note at time of programming if it's a state-only funded project, but we haven't had anything in the guidelines about how we're making those decisions. It's just more if someone marks the box on the application and it seems like we have enough state-only funds. So we could define it a little bit better, I guess, is what I'm saying here. Ted, do you think that would be?
Speak up if you want to second what Chico just said, because I mean, I think most agencies, what we've heard, there's a big difference from you guys, and potentially what you already have in here. Sorry. I think, Lori, you're on a great direction where you had large and medium infrastructure being, needing to be federally eligible. I think the question is, can we guarantee if the other types will be state funded, state-only funds?
I think David.
Hi, this is Tammy with Caltrans. The only thing that comes to my mind is if in those first couple years of the 4 years you end up with state funds out of the SB1, but for some reason or another it is a medium to large project that's programmed in the 3rd or 4th year and it's federalized, that applicant would just need to know ahead of time through some process so they know they can get their NEPA cleared in the first couple of years regardless of that mindset of state-only funds. Just some communication there is probably, and it can be in the guidelines or through the application process.
Thank you, Tammy.
Are you guys messing with me?
Yes.
I like the idea of the state-only funds or the SB1 funds just for kind of the small projects and the non-infrastructure projects. My only concern is we can't necessarily guarantee it, especially at the MPO level, because just the way programming works out, sometimes we might have to give whatever leftover funds we have to a small project, and that might be federal funds. So if we leave some flexibility in there, we would appreciate it.
Yeah, I can put some language in there just for the MPOs too, if that helps.
Yeah, I would just like to, or Carl from MTC, and I would just like to second that thought. And also, I assume that there's larger jurisdictions throughout the state that can deliver a medium-sized project with state-only or local dollars. So I wouldn't want this line to be as strict as possible.
I might put some qualifier language in there and then see how it works out in this next cycle. And we have found that it's not a good idea for us to designate all of our state-only funds up front either, because we've had times where there's a project that just for whatever reason they just desperately need state funds and we don't have them, and so we need to hold some back for those cases too. Okay, so where am I? Regional definitions of disadvantaged communities. This is page 10. We had a good discussion about this in the first workshop. And hang on a second, let me get there. Okay. So I'm under the definitions for the disadvantaged community. Right now, staff is not proposing to make any changes to the disadvantaged communities definitions except for this one on the regional definitions, because we added this in the last cycle, and it was to allow for regions that had particularly high cost of living, that they could use their own regional definition for disadvantaged communities. But the intent there was that we were looking for a definition that was well vetted, went through a robust public process, and so we got that. But then we also got some agencies that pushed through a regional definition into their RTP just specifically for the active transportation program. So we don't want that to happen again. So what we talked about in the first workshop is keeping the regional definition, but working on the language to make sure it's a strong regional definition that has gone through a well-vetted process. And I'm going to get some language from Carl and Kenny at MTC. They're going to help with that. And we're also thinking this might be a good way to encourage regions to have regional definitions of disadvantaged communities. So that's the plan right now. Keep it in there, but work on the language so it's meaningful. Teresa.
This is a comment from Laura and a question. This is in regards to federal aid eligible. She would like to see some flexibility built in so that medium or large projects that are not already federal aid could still request state-only funds. Is there a mechanism by which they can make that request ahead of the due date and get back from and hear back from CTC or Caltrans? So I guess that's the same comment that was said, that early communication, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure what due date she's talking about, but anybody can always request state funds, right, Teresa? At any time. And
yeah, they can. But again, we've had the discussion about trying to minimize the federal footprint. So the larger your project, the more likely you are to be in the federal arena. So that's where we're going.
Otherwise, all of ours will be state-only requests.
Ted, did you have something?
I'm going to start talking.
I think it will be relatively easy to kind of meet what Laura's saying is we have currently in cycle 3 guide or application, you could check a box and you could provide some justification if you felt. It didn't guarantee you state funds, but if you were a medium or a large, then you could go down, you could say, okay, yeah, I understand I have to build my project as if I'm getting federal funds, but so my schedule needs to assume NEPA, my resources need to assume NEPA, but I'm going to request state-only funds. And we could keep that in, and I think it's clear to show your guidelines only for say you have to be federal aid eligible. It doesn't say that you are guaranteed to get federal funds for medium and large. It just says you have to be eligible and plan like you're going to get it.
That's a good point. Thank you, Ted. So we moved backwards, so I'm going to move forwards again. And any comments on the definitions of disadvantaged communities? I think for rural areas in particular, I think what helped a lot last time was on the median household income. We allowed that if you, if you had a population less than 15,000, you could use a census block group, and unincorporated communities can use data at the census place level. So I think that helped. That seemed to be effective. Any comments? Yes, Rick.
One of the interesting things in the rural areas is we do qualify for the 80% less. We're actually close to 50. But the school lunches, it's at 75%. A lot of our schools run at about 65 to 70% because you have a working population that's within that community that earns enough to not qualify for that. And so maybe where in the cities you would have those clusters or concentrations of lunches, but when you get in the rural areas, you just barely have enough of that working population to not qualify, and I just wanted to point that out.
So you only have to qualify under one of them. So if in your area, if you're okay on the MHI, then you wouldn't need to use the school lunch. So so I don't know if there's other. Woody has a comment.
So it's great to see public health here. I wonder if there's ways that we could leverage some of the metrics that public health uses to identify disadvantaged communities. I'm not sure if that's been considered, but I know that in our case, it was helpful for the last round for the augmentation to have the ability to use the census place.
Okay.
But it's because the project that was selected was in that
Right.
census place, and we have one within the entire west slope of the county. So
Right.
it'd be nice to see if there's another opportunity to look at some of the public health data or metrics that they use for disadvantaged.
So I know that there's the health disadvantage index. Is that what you're talking about?
I don't know if there are other metrics that you use.
I'm Jody from Butte County Public Health. So I may or may not be able to completely answer this, but a lot of our programs run off of federal poverty level. So like 180% of the federal poverty level, which is a whole mathematical equation. In our counties, a lot of people meet that. But they're kind of the same thing he was saying, they're spread out. So all those people don't live in one certain area. So it would almost be the same thing as the school lunches, where you're getting, you're just below it because our population's so spread. I think that's mostly what we go off of. If they, Medi-Cal, WIC, a lot of the federal programs, that's how public health decides.
Okay.
So I am going to look at the health disadvantage index. I don't know if you know about that one, but that's the one. It came up last cycle, and it kind of came up at the end, and we just really didn't have time to look into it enough to see if it would be valuable or not. So I can commit to looking into that some, and maybe if a couple other of you two could do that, and we could see what people think about that, see if it's worthwhile to use. And I do want to point out too that we still have this other category that if you believe your project benefits a disadvantaged community but doesn't meet any of the other criteria due to a lack of accurate census data or Caltran virus screen data that represents a small neighborhood and unincorporated area, the applicant must submit for consideration a quantitative assessment to demonstrate that the community's median household income is at or below 80% of that state median household income. The reason for that is if you have a higher income area, but then you have this like pocket of really low income that you can't, they need a project, you can't get them to qualify under disadvantaged communities because of the larger area, you can use that. So I think Dan had a question.
Yeah, this is Dan Wayne with Shasta. I just wanted to take the opportunity to advocate for the regional definition. We've put a lot of work into this. We've looked at 13 different factors and really dug deep into the data to identify where these most disadvantaged are in our community, and we're also planning on doing some oversampling of some household travel surveys in those identified disadvantaged communities. So certainly okay with Caltran virus screen and other methodologies, but I think that as long as there's a technical methodology and a public process behind those, that the regional definitions are really invaluable for us.
Is yours adopted in your RTP yet, or
yes,
are you?
it is.
Okay. Teresa.
Laurel from Moluna from RCTC. What is the basis for 75% threshold for the free or reduced lunch qualification?
I don't know, other than it was probably from the Safe Routes to School program. Is that Ted's nodding? So yes. So that's I guess the basis was from the Safe Routes to School program. So it's just always been in there.
Thank you, Lori.
I don't know if that's a great answer, but that's why it's there. Okay. Anything else on the definitions of disadvantaged communities? Okay. So next we're going to move on to the new project categories. Okay, so this is on page 11. And one of the comments that I heard in the first workshop is that this is not in a good place in the guidelines, and it's very confusing. So I'm going to move it somewhere else because it doesn't really fit with the other categories. And what this is about is I was saying that we were going to have 5 different applications, and it's going to be for small projects that are plans, small projects that are non-infrastructure only, and small projects infrastructure only or infrastructure / non-infrastructure, and those are projects with a total project cost less than 1.5 million. Medium sized projects, which are infrastructure or infrastructure non-infrastructure, those are projects with the total project cost, and let me just say that it's a total project cost, not ATP request, is between 1.5 million and 5 million is a medium, and then the large is a total project cost of greater than 5 million. And so that will determine which application that you use. And we actually have draft applications that we've worked on with our technical advisory committee, and Caltrans has kind of gotten those all together. We've got all the feedback from the technical advisory committee. I think they're a really good start, and so we're gonna send the drafts out to the TAC first, and then that's what we'll be presenting at the workshops. I think we're going to start that in Oakland on the 16th. We'll start talking about applications. And the reason we did it that way is that if we had to start from scratch talking about applications with the large working group, we never would have gotten through it. So we had to have somewhere to start with them to bring out to all of you. So, and what they're looking like is that the large application is, that one is the most similar to what we had last cycle, right, Teresa, you think? Okay. And, but then, so that's kind of like the bar for the level of effort was what was in last cycle, and that's for the large infrastructure. And then we streamline them going down in size to make it a lot easier for the applicants, and to make sure for the questions for the plans and the non-infrastructure make more sense for those kinds of projects. Does that make sense, Carl?
Can we possibly just remove the small project non-infrastructure only or small project plan, like just the modifying language for small? Because we currently have a non-infrastructure plan in San Francisco that's above 2 million. Should it just be plan,
yes,
infrastructure, or plan and then non-infrastructure and then small project, medium project, large project?
So there could be, okay, we talked about this in the first workshop, and now, because, so you're talking about a large non-infrastructure.
So yeah, we have what would be considered a medium project,
okay,
a non-infrastructure project at 2 million. But
so then the issue is what application you would use would
correct,
be the non-infrastructure application. Okay, so then the only possible issue with that is then we're kind of at the same thing where a very small non-infrastructure project is doing the same level of effort as a very large non-infrastructure project in the application. See what I mean?
yeah, but the categories would be for infrastructure and non-infrastructure, right? On the, like, for the large project. This is just a non-infrastructure project.
But then we'd have to have an application for large non-infrastructure.
Can it just all,
right?
I mean, how many
No?
would we have?
So so it would still work?
Yeah.
Well, why are you saying no, Teresa?
Yeah, and at the TAC, I never got the sense that they were trying to cap an NI or create pockets for NI. You know, the push all along has been to have questions that ask NI related, and that's been the only push, not about size caps or small against large or anything. And there's not going to be like a set aside for NI, so you're competing the same as you always have been. So yeah, I don't. Do you?
Well, no, but so for Carl, so how big is that non-infrastructure?
It's right at 2 million. Right at 2 million.
So, but then they would be doing the non-infrastructure application.
Correct.
Okay, so just making sure that's clear.
I'm just saying
Okay.
don't limit it to just
Okay.
small projects for non-infrastructure.
Okay. Okay.
Metro has a similar comment. Shelley is saying non-infrastructure and planning projects should not be confined to being small projects because some can be as great as 1.5 million.
Okay, so same for plans? Okay. No, Woody?
Not like plans are going to be that expensive.
Yeah.
The non-infrastructure projects, there's going to be a random one from SCAG, SANDAG, and NIC.
So
we only had one.
So I respectfully wouldn't support that at all. I think, the whole point of breaking this out was so that large and small projects, whether they're infrastructure or non-infrastructure, aren't competing with one another. And if you have a $2 million plan, you're going to have $80,000 plans competing against something like that. It's going to be pretty hard to compare that apples to apples.
Yeah, that was my concern.
But there's not a set aside.
No, but it's still, it's the level of effort in the application. Because when we first started thinking about this, we were thinking non-infrastructure is generally a smaller project. Okay. So, Woody, we can wait until we talk about the applications. Let's talk about the drafts and see if it looks like that's going to be a concern. Does that sound? Yes.
If you want to do something with effort, maybe we want to toss the word counts in. I don't know. We might be driving IT insane, but for a small one, your box is 100 words, and for a large one, you can have 1,000 words, and you put the effort in that you put in for the amount of money you're asking for, or something along those lines. But you're still competing against each other.
Yeah, that's what's going to be interesting is that everything is still going. There's not going to be set-asides per category. So it's still going to be the highest scoring projects are the ones that get funded. And we're going to have to see if this works out. Where a small project, because it's doing a small project application, they can show what they need to in that application and still score high, as opposed to a large infrastructure that they're doing the level of effort that they have to for that application, that you can score a 90 for a large infrastructure and you can score a 90 for a plan. And so we're still funding the highest scoring projects. Does that make sense? Marcella?
Yeah. Isn't the commission don't they still have a cap on the plans? Isn't
Yes.
it 2%? Okay, so that kind of is a set aside sort of for the plans, not infrastructure.
Not non-infrastructure, just plans. Yeah, just plans. And we haven't actually ever gotten close to that 2% on plans yet. We might get closer now because we're going to have the separate application.
This may not be where I can ask this question, but I just wanted to get clarification on not limiting education to school students anymore for the non-infrastructure part. Are you going to talk more about that? Or it's been limited where we can only do education at schools that are within a certain distance. And now I'm getting the impression it's going to be open up. We can do education anywhere, not just only in schools.
Yeah, you've always been able to do education in other, not just schools, for non-infrastructure. Where are you seeing something
in the
that's
safe route? Well, it's in the safe route to school projects. It's saying that education must be done.
That's just
within
for
2 miles of a public school.
That's just for our projects that's designating as safe routes to school. So in the first cycle of the program, there was a set aside for safe routes to school projects, and so we have that as a category. We've kept it as a category because we like tracking that to show how many safe routes to school projects that we're funding.
Okay, so now the ATP funds won't have that limitation anymore. It'll just be wherever we want to do education.
Yeah, but it's always had that.
Okay.
You can do education programs in a non-safe routes to school project.
That's just there to be labeled as a
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay, I was told to get clarification.
Oh,
I
okay.
did. Thank you.
Well, and if it's not, if I need to add some language, if it's confusing, I can do that. Okay.
Victoria from SACOG, Kashatori. Yeah, Victoria Kashatori. How were the funding limits identified for small, medium, and large projects?
That was identified with the help from the Technical Advisory Committee. Rick.
Just kind of going back to the cap just briefly. Earlier I was talking about caps per agencies, but have we also thought about caps for very large projects in the statewide application? If you're limit the number of large projects so that we don't have it on the statewide, and again push it down into having more eligibility, where the large projects, if eligible, could be in the MPOs, or if you're ineligible, maybe be in the statewide, but something to consider.
So would the reason for doing that would be to be able to fund more in the state? Is that what you're saying?
Yes,
Okay.
so you can disperse it out to more
Right.
projects.
It's an interesting idea.
I think this is a perfect group. What would the rural communities feel about the rural component of the program, that 10% being no large projects, only, you know, medium and small that would allow it? I mean, I thought that's where you were going, Rick.
Well, the problem with the rural is the rural goes up to 200,000, and you still have a large cluster of medium-sized projects for medium-sized agencies in there. So it really is what I'm looking for is more of the statewide being able to go to a larger footprint.
So he's saying that if projects over a certain amount, we'd only fund a certain number of very large projects out of the state, and anything else would have to go to the MPO.
Well, what I'm saying is having an MPO. Having an MPO, consider that rurals are not eligible only for 50%. And so what you want to do is not have a $10 million MPO project in that statewide, eating up that capacity, leave those larger projects in the MPO group, unless one of the non-eligible counties, which would be a rural county, to have a project that would fit in there. That would be the only place they could apply, but have it in there. But for the larger, push those off to the MPO and keep the more projects dispersed in the statewide.
So it's interesting that you brought that up, Rick, because in the last workshop we did talk about this, but in a totally different way from what you're talking about. There is some desire to fund at least a couple very large projects out of the state, what are transformative projects. So that came up in the first workshop as something to consider. Probably not for this cycle, because there wouldn't be anybody that would have a project like that ready to go. But in these guidelines, set that up for the next cycle.
Okay, but one of the goals or discussions I hear a lot is finding ways to make more people eligible in the statewide, and that would do the exact opposite of what you're trying to achieve.
Okay, where are we going?
Yeah, to kind of go off of the conversation we had at the last workshop, I think it is a good idea to maybe look at some very large transformative projects that could, for example, build out a city's entire active transportation network. And I wouldn't want to necessarily have the guideline structured so you could limit that. However, I have seen that there's one project out in Southern California that's taken a big chunk of the money, and it's had some eligibility and deliverability issues that, yeah, we do need to have more scrutiny on projects that are over 10 million, like you're suggesting in the guidelines. But I wouldn't want to limit something transformational like that from potentially happening.
So what? I wanted to ask David a follow-up. So David, you're saying that you think it's good to have a transformational project, but explain it again.
I think it's good to have like some of those large projects over $10-20 million. So you just need to have some extra scrutiny of them, like you're proposing in the eligibility review. I don't know if we need a separate application for them at this point because there's probably not a lot of them coming online anytime soon. But I wouldn't want to say put a hard cap on. You can only get a maximum of $10 million per project because there are some very good large projects out there. Like a pedestrian overcrossing these days over an interstate costs you $10-15 million, and I wouldn't want to limit you from having to try to come up money for another funding source for that.
Right. And and one of the things when this came up is I didn't quite understand it at first because those large projects are eligible now. So I was like, why do we need to have anything special in there? But what the proponents have said is that if this is in the guidelines, it provides this kind of political backing for it that would help agencies be able to propose something like that. Okay, wait, this Teresa first.
I'm not sure if I missed the point about pushing it to the MPOs. Was that where you were going? Well, just a yes or no, because I mean, how much money does BCAG get in a 4-year? I mean, do you have $5 million, $10 million in the program for the small MPOs?
BCAG isn't one of them.
Okay.
I don't know.
I like where this conversation's headed.
Okay. So SACOG gets $10 million. What do you get, David? David, yeah.
You're gonna choke on it. Yeah. Okay. Anyway.
Lewis.
Lewis Zhao, OCTA. So we kind of have the same issue because we have the geographic equity policy in the SCAG region. We don't get that much money through the MPO, and funding a $10 million project would just chew up more money than we can ever put out there in 2 years.
So what Lewis is talking about is by statute, SCAG actually has to have geographic equity in their MPO component. Each county gets a certain amount, right? So it would really affect the SCAG MPO component.
Okay, this is from Linda Commotion of California Bicycle Coalition. Do not agree with caps on large projects. If you want more innovative projects that will cost more, need to give applicants the flexibility to do so, especially if the program cycle is not going to be 4 years.
Okay. Did you have another one?
Well, it's going back to the DAX.
We can go back.
Okay, let's see. There it is. Okay. Sarkis from SBCAG, they would appreciate if CTC considered additional criteria for defining DAX, especially for coastal areas that have cleaner air. And, oops, it just kind of moved.
Sorry, Sarkis.
Cleaner
just
air,
like your air
and
quality
higher
just
cost
moved.
of living. And they're happy to provide language.
So Sarkis is proposing more disadvantaged community. Yes. Okay, thanks, Sarkis. That's
in
great.
Santa Barbara.
Okay.
Sorry, Lori. I got so many glares on my last comment. I got to say this again. I just think, just from my perspective, trying to be, spreading money around in the HSIP and the old program, is that if you're rural and you only have the 10% rural component. So let's say you submit a project and it's a 10 million or over 5 million. You need a $6 million project. You submit that project. Maybe you acknowledge that if you don't get funded in the statewide, you will not compete for the rural. Because I do know that in the rural, there's been some big projects that drop in there and they just wipe out large chunks of that little small pot. So I think it's worthy of, putting out, you guys will be the one that'll comment to CTC, but I want to throw that out there, that if you have a $5 or $10 million project and you're in a rural area, that you qualify for the rural funds, you acknowledge that if I don't get the statewide, I'm not going to compete, because you might get that score, because what that happened in the last cycle. A couple really big projects took out a ton of rural options. So
I understand what you're saying, Ted. I don't think I could ever manage to get that through, because that means that we would be dropping out a project that scored higher. And if it's a really high scoring project in a rural area that's $20 million, then it is. And that's how it's worked out.
It would get that diversity
I was going to say something. Oh, I know. So one of the things that I have a hard time when we start talking about that, like unincorporated areas aren't as doing well, and that if you're not in a DAC, you can't get funded. All of these things that they're kind of they're what people are seeing, what they think they're seeing in the program. Unfortunately, we have not done the kind of analysis that we probably really need to do to figure out what is really going on. And that's what I'd really like to do. See if there's areas that are submitting and not getting funded, and why. And if, what was the other thing I said? And if the disadvantaged community points are skewing the program somehow in a way that we don't want. And I think that we are really hoping to be able to do an evaluation of the program to get at some of these. And then I think that we can make some better decisions. Right now, we're kind of just basing on what we think is happening. Dan.
Yeah, Dan with Shasta. I would just advocate for the best projects to win. I think there's these large projects, there's some presumption, I think, from some of the comments that they're hard to compete with. As a ATP reviewer, if you're asking for millions of dollars for a project, you're going to receive a lot of scrutiny. It better be a darn good project if it's going to eat up all of that funding capacity. So I don't think small projects are at a disadvantage, and I would hate for money to get spent on token projects, even if my region was to be a loser on that end. If I don't have a project that competes well and that is consistent with the program, then maybe that project shouldn't be funded. We work hard to develop projects. It takes years of work to develop a project to be competitive, and I want my project to be considered on its merits, not for some arbitrary allocation formula.
Thank you, Dan.
So I'd actually support what Dan just said. I think this new 5-tier application process will help some of our rural smaller agencies develop applications and not have to make such a strong case, not as strong a case as some of these multi-million-dollar projects. I'd also just respectfully disagree with Trinity County. I think we would like to see some of those transformative projects all over the state, and I think we may see some of them in some of the rural areas. I know El Dorado County is considering one 37-mile Class 1 facility in the West Slope. So I'd like to see those remain, even though that is somewhat counter to our arguments in the past, but I think it'd be good for the program as a whole.
So I want to talk more about this idea a little bit later, but now that we're talking about it now, I want to mention something that Tracy was talking about last night when I asked her about large transformative projects, and she was telling me that sometimes if you have like a bike network that has gaps, closing those gaps can be as transformative as building a whole new network. So I thought that was very interesting, that that is something to consider as we think about this issue too.
I have a comment.
Okay.
This is from Tony Dang. Tony Dang from California Walks.
Yes.
If we proceed with large network style set aside, then we also need a parallel investment in planning grants for large network style projects to make it an even playing field for all communities. There is a precedent in this with SGC TCC program, where they are also investing in planning grants.
So Tony's talking about the Strategic Growth Council's transformative community something, right? Okay. I think think so Tony's saying that if we were to consider a set aside for large projects, we'd have to have some kind of a set aside for planning for large projects. And I think that's what we were talking about maybe doing in this cycle, is somehow if we were going to do that next cycle, what do we need to do this cycle to get ready for that for next cycle?
I don't know if you necessarily need a set aside for large projects or even plans for large projects. If you have a good application to create a good plan, you'll get that plan funded. For example, City of Stockton had a citywide bicycle master plan update funded through cycle 1. They're just finishing up and going to be adopted in a month from tomorrow, I think. And that's looking at one of those low stress north, south, east, west kind of backbone networks that could be one of those transformative projects. And I think if you have a good application for a good plan, you're going to get your project funded. It's not just a matter of we need to get more set-asides, because I don't think more set-asides is really the answer to any of these problems we're coming up with.
I just want to say that I do support the commission's limit on the plan, the percentage, the 2%. In our region, we use our PPM money for our regions. Caltrans has planning grants. So if this does happen and it goes in the guidelines, I'd like to see that regions at least tried, and or say why they didn't have PPM funds, or why that they would have to apply for a Caltrans grant, because that's the way our regions get our planning done.
So at the last workshop, I think that set-aside comment was for, or recommendation was for the transformative projects, and that didn't get a lot of support. So I'm wondering why it's coming up again.
Well, he's not here, so I'll say my boss supports it. So that's one reason that it's coming up.
There you go. Next item.
I would just like to support Sam Joaquin's comments, and that if you're a good plan, you'll be eligible and you'll be able to be awarded under that. And like you said earlier today, we haven't even come close to that 2% cap on plans. And if we're opening up nearly double amount of the money, we should still be okay.
Okay. Yeah, and Jeff, it's he wants us to at least talk about it. So,
they can be good projects. Certainly.
Yeah.
But they can also just compete on a regular basis.
Yeah, and so that's and this is the piece that maybe if Linda from CalBike could send in a comment, because this is what I like I said, I am not quite connecting the dots on this. Why, if they can submit for those anyway, why do we have to have something special? But it has to do with what they said is that it gives you this political backing then to get your local electives on board. So
yeah, I mean, more details would be great, because I don't understand it.
Anything else? So Linda, if you want to send in a comment to help me on that, that would be great. Okay. Let's see. Where am I now?
Do we need a break?
Oh.
You guys good?
Yeah. Need a break?
Bathroom break, stretch break. You good? Power through? Powering through.
Teresa says let's move on.
Sorry.
Oops. Okay. So a lot of this we've kind of talked about the 5 different applications. I actually had a suggestion this week for another application for rec trails. So because it's perhaps recreational trail projects are having trouble competing with with everything else. I don't know. I'm going to think about that, but I think that's going to be a stretch for us to create another application. Right? You guys think?
Do we have an estimate how many rec trail projects have been applied for?
I don't know. We don't get a ton, actually. 26?
Over all cycles?
in the last cycle. So last cycle we had about 456, so 26 out of the 456. So, yes, Dan.
So just anecdotally, I'm recalling that the town of Truckee gotten, I think, 2 or 3 ATP grants for recreational trails, so I don't think it's an issue.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. And then the MPO supplemental call, this is more just administrative things. Oh, no. So this was, did we talk about that for the supplemental call that the applications had to go to the state? We talked about that? Yes. Okay. And then MPO checklist and programming template, and then screening for appropriate applications. I had talked about that we would screen to make sure the applicants were using the right application, but then someone very wisely pointed out that the application itself will screen it for us. So you won't be able to, if you have a $10 million project, you can't do the small infrastructure application. Okay. Yes. Okay.
Just one thing, and April Nitzos might be able to also help you with this. Talking about page 11, the recreational trails project or program.
Yep.
I wanted to make sure that there wasn't a belief that the Federal Lands Access Project or program would serve that. In the Federal Lands Access Program, they actually look for ATP applications and contributions before you start pursuing the Federal Lands Access Program dollars. Okay. And so I just wanted to make sure that that was kind of a little bit spelled out, so that, because here it says you can't go after it unless you've tried for other eligible money, yet this other program is saying that same thing. So I didn't want to have the two fingers pointing at each other situation.
Oh, so, okay, what that means in there is that there's a small portion of the ATP funding that can only go towards recreational trails projects. Can't remember how much it is, a couple million. And so that's one reason that we asked to designate that, is that we have to make sure that we're meeting that we're using those funds for recreational trail projects. So that's what that's intending to refer to, but it may be a little bit confusing now.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure
Right.
that we know that you apply for an ATP grant to help augment a Federal
Okay.
Lands access.
Thank you. Anything else? Nope.
I just realized that I misspoke earlier. I think I was listening to Jeff talk about the transformative projects set aside.
Yes.
I certainly wouldn't support that, but I was suggesting that we support, that the program will support a number of large transformative projects that are highly competitive and without the set aside component.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anything else? Okay, so a lot of this is committed and uncommitted funds on page 17. This is a section that I added because it's always very confusing on if we're going to, if there's any instances where we would partially fund a project. And so what we're trying to be clear here is that we only fund projects that are fully funded. The only case where we would make an exception to that is in the MPO component, if it's at the project that's at the cutoff line that the MPO just doesn't have enough funds for and they can't figure out what else to do with it. So they can partially fund the project, and then we'll work on a way to get the project fully funded. And then I added this section about that uncommitted funds can be from the local partnership program and the STIP, and from the formula portion of the local partnership program. Okay, Woody's looking at me like I don't know. Okay. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay, so then the program amendment section, all that is, that's just from our policy on amendments. I just put the language in there from the policy. And then FTA transfers, that is a situation doesn't come up very often, but when it does, we need to make sure we know what we're doing on that. So I'll add that language. And there is a letter of no prejudice. We just adopted a policy on that, right, Teresa, at the last meeting. But what my boss always points out is that before you do a letter of no prejudice, you might want to just advance your project. Okay, and the timely use of funds. This was something that I actually forgot to mention at the last workshop. So if you recall, originally for time extensions, there was only for allocation, we only allowed 12 months. And then some stuff happened, and then some agencies wanted more time, and so in the last guidelines, it changed to 20 months. So our staff would like to recommend it to go back to 12 months now, because we're going to have the 4-year program, and there shouldn't be this reason for the 20 months. The problem with the 20 months is that it was intended to be for like super extraordinary situations, but as you can imagine, that's not really what happens now. People just ask for 20 months. And it's really hard to determine between what is an extraordinary circumstance and what's super extraordinary. So any comments? Okay, Lewis has a comment.
Lewis OCTA. A number of our agencies use a 20-month extension, and I think rightfully so. We've had a lot of issues with the railroads, for example, their property, getting access to the property. If you can't even get access to the property, you can't even start your environmental process. So I would request to keep the 20-month in there, especially for projects where there are just extreme forces against the agency. And we've actually probably used up all those 20 months just to complete a NEPA on certain projects.
Thank you, Lewis. I had no idea Orange County used 20 months a lot. I'm kidding. Okay, Teresa has something.
The railroad agreements are not new, and it's not an extraordinary. They are very difficult to work with. We realize that, but that is not extraordinary. If you have a railroad that you need to, if you have to negotiate with a railroad company, you have to be realistic at the time you develop your schedule, and that is the risk. So it is very difficult. We realize that, but it is not extraordinary. It is common if you are by a railroad track.
Teresa, do any other programs allow for 20 months? The STIP does.
On the new competitive programs, the Solutions for Congested Corridors, the Trade Corridor, the Local Partnership Program, we are recommending, well, 2 of them, it's 12 months for allocation and award. I had originally had 6 months, but that did not go well.
Are there any other? Okay, David has a comment.
I was just thinking maybe there's a way to go about this where you have it based on the size of the project. Small projects, we shouldn't be having any delays on them. They should be easy to deliver. If you have a delay, it's because you didn't work on the project. Large $10 million projects, you are going to run into the same kind of delays you have on a large STIP project. You're going to have utility delays, right-of-way delays. Some of them, yes, you should have foreseen them, especially with the railroads, but for example, you might have a project where you have cultural resources that you identified that you had no idea were there until you started excavation, or if you got into environmental design and this came up. So maybe there's some way to leave some flexibility in there for the large 5 million above projects for a longer time extension like the STIP, and go with shorter periods for the very small projects.
What do you think about that, Louis? Would that make a difference?
Lewis of CTA. So I think I'm okay with that, but I think the issue is you have to look at we have large corridors that are being done, and when we're submitting projects to the ATP, they're in phases. So we're submitting one phase; it can only be $1 million. So it looks like it's a tiny project, but if you look at the whole corridor itself, that's 15, 20, 30 miles long. It's a class 1. That's where you're starting to talk about that project being fairly massive. So if we go with that type of a recommendation, it needs to be a little more flexible, and you need to be able to see. You need to give the agencies a chance to explain that this is just one small segment on a larger project.
I think Carl, you had something.
Since we are moving to a 4-year cycle with overlap, would we be given the opportunity the same way in the STIP to reprogram phases if we did encounter cultural resource issues and environmental during that first year? And then the next cycle comes around and say, hey, do we have the opportunity to reprogram our construction phase out?
So what we're doing with 2 of our programs, brand new programs, is that 1 year is overlapping, and so we are allowing the flexibility to reprogram the last year of the cycle. I don't know if that would be a possibility in this program. So that's something to think about. Leave the 12 months.
So what you said in the new competitive, okay.
Solutions for congested corridors. The last year of the program, the last year of the cycle, it is the first year of the next cycle, and we are allowing the agencies to be able to reprogram the project once to the next cycle. Does that make sense?
So we can talk about that with that.
Interesting.
Is that what? So the only thing is then, are you leaving allocation capacity from one cycle and then eating into yours? Yeah.
One of the things we have in our guidelines is that it has to be with a good justification. Okay, so just because you ask for it doesn't mean that you will be able to reprogram, because for that reason we have to look at the capacity and the new projects, because now we have to balance. We have to be constrained by fiscal year, and so that is something that we would have to look into also. So to the extent that we could, why not? But you may not be able to. Oh.
Hasn't been constrained by what?
By fiscal year.
Well, we are. So let me ask this question, because we can talk about this. So with the time extension, could it be an either or, like this? Either have the 20-month, or we have the reprogram the last year.
Well, I would advocate for a 12-month just
12.
to get projects going. But if you run into a situation where construction got messed up by your what you found in your environmental phase, you're allowed to push that construction phase out.
Okay.
I mean, I feel like that would maybe resolve a few of the issues, and that would focus on larger projects.
We have a comment from Shelley at Metro.
Yes.
Maximum extension request for allocation should not be reduced from 20 months. Although a 4-year program will help agencies spread phases across years rather than jamming into 2 years or 3 years, it does not eliminate potential for unexpected delays to pop up. For example, a project could still encounter a 20-month environmental delay in the first year of the ATP programming. Without the ability to get a 20-month extension, the project wouldn't be able to recover. If there was a reprogramming mechanism, just like we were talking about, yeah, I don't know about that, but we can surely.
Yeah, we'll talk about that.
Take a look at it.
Okay. Okay. Anything else on that? Okay.
We have a couple more. Oh my gosh, we have a lot now. Can we apply for cycle? Oh, this is off topic. Should we cover it or not? Bring up whenever things. We can bring it up later then. Design only Projects, design only is critical to allowing larger projects to develop. Projects that will make a difference in an area are complex, often need political power, and take a lot of time to refine. Even with a 4-year program, bike ped projects are transportation projects that take time to develop. Please keep the option to apply for design only in the guidelines, not just MPO problem solving too. This is from Victoria of SACOG.
Okay.
20 versus 20 months. 20 months should be kept as an option. Biological assessments may need to align with specific animal mating season, which happens once a year, and your project partners sometimes don't respond in time for you to keep the schedule around that. City of Elk Grove could tell you more about their frog issue. Okay. Okay, this is from Mara Ambag. I do not think that you should have different extension criteria for large and small projects. I think this disadvantages small rural projects, which often require extensions because of staffing issues or the inability to obtain a contractor.
What about the frog? Is that
frog? Maybe that is something
we'll move on from mating seasons.
No, I think this is something definitely that we need to discuss also with our management, because I don't know if you all were involved in this. I think it was the first cycle, and that was painful for staff. It was painful for everyone. The commission was very concerned that this is a competitive program, and a lot of the agencies were kind of taking the time extension as a buffer, and realistically, their projects could not be delivered in the time frame that they competed for. That was the big concern, and we have scars, and we all do. And so this is something now that this program is going to be ongoing. We have more funding. We have longer programming cycles where let's show that we can deliver the projects in the times that we said we were going to deliver them. And so, I don't know. So that is something that we need to discuss with our management, because our management is concerned, our commissioners are concerned, and that is the reason why Lori is proposing it. But that is something that we can surely continue discussing.
Yeah, I think it wasn't this past June, but the June before that we had how many, like 60 or something ATP
we had
allocation
over
time.
60 time extensions,
and
allocations.
That raised a big red flag to the commissioners, and we had to do a lot of scrambling to try to explain that. And if that keeps happening, then I don't know. We'll have to get much stricter on timely use of funds then. Okay. Are we done with that? Okay, so page 24, project savings. This is just a clarification of what happens with project savings, that they go back to the overall program, not to like if there's savings in Orange County, they don't go back to Orange County. They go back to the overall program. Then project reporting. I think I put this in kind of a placeholder that we might be adding project reporting requirements for SB1. I'm not sure yet. We're going to have the SB1 accountability guidelines to see how that's going to affect the ATP. So we'll come back to that. I just want to point out the project signage. That was specifically for SB1. And so that kind of goes back to the issue of are we going to have to designate which projects are specifically only SB1 funded? So that we'll get back to that too. Okay, so these are some things that came up. Well, the last one was the one that we just talked about because I had forgotten it in the last workshop. So these were some things that came up in the first workshop. The need to better define non-infrastructure startup projects. There was some concern about what that means and what non-infrastructure projects are eligible or not. Is there any comments on that? Do you want to, Emily? Do you want to explain that a little bit more? You probably have a better.
I got it. Okay. Yeah, Emily, explain it.
So the comment that was brought up was that a non-infrastructure project has to be a startup project. It can't be something that's already, occurring and then just needs more funding toward it. So the comment was just to better define that as to what it means to be a startup, reaching new schools, things like that. So we're still looking into how to define it a little bit stronger.
Any comments on that here? No.
So we'll see new language?
Yeah, I think that, Emily, maybe you could work on that, and then we can have something for next workshop.
Yeah, it's on page 7. On page 7, there's a blurb about what a non-infrastructure project is. So I think that's where we'd maybe make some edits.
Okay. Thanks, Emily. And then, so we started talking about the set aside for large network projects. My sense was this particular group is not a huge fan of that, but let me see. Anybody have any comments now on that? No. Well, that's all I had. So now I just want to see anything that you all want to talk about now, anything in particular, issues that this group thinks that we need to discuss in the guidelines, other areas that need work, need revision, anything that's driving you crazy?
I have an off-topic comment,
Okay.
remember? Okay,
Yes.
this is from Greg Martin, Santa Cruz County.
Okay.
Off-topic. This seems to be a little gray. If we received funding for the design of a project in the last cycle, can we apply this cycle for construction?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. That's it.
Woody?
So in that, on page 7, I honestly hadn't reviewed that as thoroughly as I just found this on.
Here.
And it's a little confusing. It's a little confusing in that it talks about projects and programs somewhat interchangeably. Maybe that would help to clarify some of that confusion.
That's a good point. Thank you.
And also I'd like to clarify ask if we can get clarifying language for infrastructure projects and non-infrastructure components, like if that has to be a new startup program as well, or if that can also go back to an already existing program. If it is an infrastructure project, does the non-infrastructure component have to be new, or can that also go back to an existing program?
It's all right. It's all good.
Hey, Lori, I thought I had read somewhere that we wouldn't be allowed to just ask for funds for pre-construction, but I don't see it now, so I think I might have been...
So that was on the section of committed and uncommitted funds. So let me get my guidelines, see what it says. Okay, page 17. So, uncommitted funds may only be from the following programs, which is the local partnership program, the formula part of that, and the STIP. And the applicant must indicate its plan for securing a funding commitment. Explain the risk of not securing that commitment and its plan for securing an alternate source of funding should the commitment not be obtained. And that is if you are planning on uncommitted funds from those sources. And then if a project with uncommitted funds is programmed, all funding commitments must be secured. Okay, let's see.
I think it might be on the next page. at
Yeah,
the top.
okay.
Yeah.
The commission will program and allocate funding to projects and hold thousands of dollars and only include a project that's fully funded from a combination of ATP and other committed funding.
So that's all components. So environmental through construction. In the past, you could only. you know,
Yeah,
you could-
we did have that in the past. Yeah.
Okay, I knew I saw that.
Yes.
So that's new for
That's new.
for us this year.
Yes.
Okay, I'll get feedback from my region.
Okay.
I think it's probably a good idea, but I'd like to see what our
Okay.
locals have to say.
Lori, to follow up on that, I would be in favor of that for the small and medium projects, but I think large projects should maybe have the flexibility to be able to ask just for environmental design right away. It's going to take them potentially longer than 4 years to deliver a very large project. So if we could have the flexibility just to ask for environmental design for at least for the large projects, I think we would be in favor of that.
Okay. Where's my pen? Okay, so for large, is that what you said, David? Just large projects could come in for up to design? Okay. Okay.
I think it's a great idea because it allows you to develop a better cost of what your project's actually going to be. Yeah, I know. But I'm just saying, statewide,
Yeah.
it's kind of like what we do with the STIP. We do design environmental first, and then eventually get to asking for construction dollars.
So to be clear, Marcella, what we're saying is that for all the components, we would allow that for potentially. I guess the only.
I have to either have committed or non-committed funds for everything.
No,
Oh, no,
large
I'm reading it.
projects could come in just up to design or
For
maybe
large
right away.
projects.
Yeah, for large projects.
Because right now it says it's the
Yeah.
MPO cutoff. So that's
Right. So David's suggesting to modify that to large projects only could come in for design and maybe right away. But the only thing is then what if it never gets, so.
If we flip to page 22, the second paragraph on page 22.
Yes.
This goes the typical Fed 10-year rule. I think this could be the protection, in an agency. How would that work for MPOs or people supporting projects going forward with design only that have no additional, scoring bonus in the future for ATP? Do regions feel like they can help make sure agencies don't get caught in this? Because I think that is one of the things the CTC doesn't want to see happen, is that an agency get PS&E funds, spend $2 million, have a project that's not competitive for whatever reason in future ATP cycles, and now that agency is stuck with a $2 million bill.
Do you have anywhere in the guidelines where that if you do not complete the project within 10 years, you have to return the funds?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay. Doesn't that take care of it?
Well, no, but we can say we're gonna take $2 million from you, but do you have $2 million to give us? And do we want that?
And just
Lori, correct me if I'm wrong, doesn't this paragraph, this is now an ATP rule. So what ATP is doing is taking a federal rule and saying it's now an ATP rule for state funds.
So I got this language. So one of the things I forgot to say in the beginning was that some of the changes in the guidelines this time are based on having consistent language with our other programs now. And I would imagine I took that from the Trade Corridors program. Okay. And so is there some reason why it shouldn't be in the ATP?
No, it's just very clear.
Okay.
Because we had regions apply for only pre-construction
Yeah.
before, so I'm going to let them know that
Yeah.
the rules are up right now if they have comments.
Okay. Got it.
I was just going to mention back on the design first and then later. There's ways of handling, like having it on your constraint list of your RTP, or showing that you have future CMAQ and STIP capacity to address that should you not get the ATP dollars. So I think if you can show that you can do that, you should be eligible for splitting a project like that.
So, are there other topics or issues that we haven't talked about yet? That Teresa says the program should just fund construction. Does everyone like that? David, did you have something? No. Yes.
I was just going to follow up on the whole thing about asking for design only, and I realized that that's been a concern with all the cycles so far, that you have agencies come in, get partial funding, and then they don't do well in the next cycle. These are projects that, if it's a big priority for agencies that are going to ask for design, they should figure out, hey, I'm going to find a way to fund this project no matter what. Even if it's not from ATP, look at STIP shares from your counties, look at CMAQ. People should be able to find a way in 10 years to get a project built.
And something that big is probably derived from another extensive planning document that's already vetted the financial plan, I would think.
Could you just reiterate, one of the last bullets that you had on the slides was about a set aside for large network projects?
Yeah.
And I don't, where is that in the guidelines?
No, it's not yet, but that's the issue that came up in the first workshop, that there are some proponents of that, of having a set aside for funding one or two large transformative projects that are, I don't know, 25 million or something. And so it's just something that has come up and that we're going to talk about. And we wouldn't do it for this cycle because the thought is there wouldn't be a project that's of that size that's ready. But if we were to do that in the next cycle, do we need to put something in the guidelines this cycle to alert applicants to be ready for that for the next cycle?
If that were to be considered at some point in the future, I think whatever entity is proposing that project, that they should have some considerable pre-investment in a large, in other words, the ATP isn't starting something new, that it's helping to implement something that's been worked on for years and that already has a considerable amount of funding commitment and local commitment. It's not just a grant writer's idea.
That's what I was saying.
So where I first heard this idea was more focused on constructing large bike networks. So you have enough funding that you can just do a complete bike network somewhere, instead of just doing, little projects here and there.
There's a comment on that topic.
Okay.
It says, the idea, this is from Linda from CalBike, the idea that Chris Morphus brought up at the kickoff meeting was that CTC can put in the guidelines that the ATP would fund one network grant each cycle, starting with this cycle, thereby encouraging more communities to think holistically about creating connected bikeways. This is the model more and more cities around the country and the world are adopting to actually impact public health and mode share on a large scale by creating safe networks, not just one bike lane or a pathway here and there. This would get people more physically active more of the time and have a host of benefits that meet the goals of the ATP. We discussed at the meeting and has been said today that right now that such projects are already eligible for ATP, but very, very few communities are at that stage to even propose it and then carry it out in the program cycle.
Thank you, Linda. Yes, Jeff.
So that's why we have bike plans. I mean, ATP plans, that's what they are. They're our entire network. So if that comment is requesting to fund an entire bike plan, if you look at the long term, that's not equitable. We're not going to go through the state and fund everybody's ATP plan. So it doesn't really seem like a good fit for this program.
So what about, though, funding the actual construction of the network?
It's the same thing. The construction of the network is an entire bike plan, right? Okay. So it just seems a little bit unequitable to think that we're going to take the next 50 years of ATPs and pick away everybody's bike plan throughout the state. I think project basis is better fit for the ATP program.
So what, one of the things that Linda was pointing out, the positive of doing this is that a project like that could show more greater benefits, such in things like mode shift.
I support, I totally agree with Jeff. It would greatly exacerbate the geographic equity issue. You're going to have a lot of large networks, bike plans, ATP plans that are going to be delivered, and you're going to leave out a lot of the areas that are delivering their active transportation plans, but on a project by project basis.
Does anybody here know more about the SGC's TCC program than I do? Because that's what people bring up as a model, and I, to be honest, haven't had a chance to look at it very much. If that is just something that that we should be looking at, or if that's their program and the ATP has other goals. Ted?
I'm in no way an expert on this issue, but I mean, you're taking, I think it's $140 million program. The state picked one locale, which I think is Fresno, that's going to get $70 million to do a transformative investment in there. Another locality, I think, is going to get $35 million, and then another $35 million is going to go up for, kind of a bid, or competitively. So, I mean, the point of that program is transformative. So it is clearly the state of California setting aside a certain program to go after that type of transformative thing. So I think you could argue that either way. You could say, oh, they're setting it aside, so therefore it's a big need, or and ATP should consider it, or you could say, let's see what that program does, and let's see how it works in that program before we put it into ATP.
Lori,
yes.
Linda knows about TCC, but she's not in the room, but she's on the phone. So if you want her, do you want her to talk about TCC? Because she knows, !
So if we take everybody off
just for Victoria.
No, for Linda.
I'm sorry. I got it confused. It's Victoria Cacciatore from SACOG.
I don't know if we can just take her off of the...
No. We would take everyone.
I don't know if we can trust everyone.
Give it a try.
Okay.
Okay.
Let me go around.
Okay, Victoria. Get ready. Because Carl, you weren't at the last round of ATP workshops when everything went crazy. They're in listen only.
So I've been to some of the meetings, and so we talked about the 70 million going to Fresno, and a big chunk of that is about land use. And that's part of what's going to be causing or driving the changes that are, so that includes housing and transit and your transportation and your health and all of that. So that's, obviously we're not doing that.
So it's, because it has all of those other elements, it can be really transformative then, yeah. Okay. Rick.
Oh,
one of the things we talked about at the RCTF is regionally important projects, and that sometimes it's hard to necessarily define it, especially in the rural areas. The rural areas will have a very important project that several communities in that area want, but it's hard to quantify that regional significance within the program itself.
So last cycle we have talked about giving points or something like that for a regionally significant project. Is that like a designation that you use?
No, but when like we have a bike path that's going to go through a park or connect a park to a road. It has been in the plans for 15 years. It's been the board's #1 priority. Matter of fact, we're funded. It's sitting on the bookcase right now, ready to go to construction. That has been designated and is well known in our RTP to be regionally significant. We haven't necessarily called it that, but I could safely say that is what our board has designated and our community has designated as the top priority right now.
So I don't think that we're able to work the phones. Oh, no. Okay. Oh, okay. Okay, Victoria, if you're there.
Yes, I am here. But I'm not certain what the question still is. Are eligible for transformative climate communities, and you're expected to have active transportation program elements in your project.
So yeah, so I think it was just that this has been brought up to me before, is to look at something that we should use as a model for having if we were going to do this transformative projects. Okay, Teresa's going to put everyone back in listen only.
Lori, I think it was mentioned briefly at the last workshop, but I think a better thing to look at might be that pilot project FHWA did in Marin County, I think back in 2012, where they gave them $25 million and said, okay, take this money, put it into walking and biking, and tell us what it does. So something like that might be a better model than the transformative climate communities.
What was that called?
It was an FHWA pilot program that Marin County got $25 million out of. I think if you just Google it, FHWA pilot program biking bed, it'll pop up.
Or, also what we can do is that we can take all this back and, talk to maybe Victoria or Strategic Growth Council and just come up with maybe suggested language and propose it at the next workshop. Because we're not really quite sure what it is. We have different definitions, different ideas. And so that way we can get moving.
Okay. So anything else? Any other topics? Anyone? Yes.
So you're still trying to... A question about the signage that was on the slide. You're still trying to figure out which projects are going to be...
So if you remember in the augmentation guidelines, we added that because that was SB1 funds. So we want everyone to know what SB1 is funding. So because the augmentation funds were going specifically to SB1 projects, we had a signage requirement that we have that same language in the SB1 programs. So this goes back to if we're going to designate which projects are SB1 only funded. And if we do that, then we would have the signage requirement. Because at this point, we don't have a signage requirement, except for the ones that were funded out of augmentation.
So my only concern is that there are jurisdictions that did not support SB1, and we're realizing that now with the repeal effort. SB1 as a fix-it-first, maintenance bill, I would be concerned about marketing bike and ped projects in my jurisdiction with
Okay.
SB1 signs. I mean, we will do that if that's the requirement, of
Okay.
course, but just a thought.
Yeah, thank you.
Should have asked you to sit up there, right?
I realize that some jurisdictions are sensitive about Senate Bill 1, but I think we also need to make the argument that, yes, it is a good thing that you are getting back in ped projects. And so we want to get that message out there that, hey, Senate Bill 1 is providing funds for these good projects in your community, even if you didn't support SB 1.
I'll make you a sandwich board. You can carry it around.
Any other comments? Okay, Ted?
Just a thought on SB1 is SB1 only, or maybe the con phase. You know, because if the if the construction phase was funded with SB1, but maybe some earlier phase wasn't.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good point. Thank you. Anyone have anything else? If not, well, we could actually end early. So keep in mind that the next workshop is next Thursday at LA Metro. And go ahead and call me or send me comments. Thank you everyone for coming, and thank you to BCAG. Thank you, Yvonne.
Thank you all for coming to Chico.
Thank you, Teresa.